Minister Nigel Farage.
Thank you, Donald, and good evening, everybody. Well, I'm here in Brussels, where there is a summit. The leaders of the 28 member states, soon to be 27, of the European Union are all here today. And, of course, they're talking about terrorism and security, but equally, Brexit is being discussed as well. And I'm just thinking back to a year ago today, a year ago at this moment. Campaigning had finished, the polls were about to open, and June the 23rd proved to be, I think, a big surprise to the establishment, a big surprise to the global community, because despite everything we were told by our leaders, the great and the good, President Obama, you name it, we voted for Brexit on June the 23rd. I said the next morning, I thought in future it should become a public holiday and we should call it our Independence Day. Well, that hasn't happened, but I guess what has happened is a 9-month period in which we saw a Prime Minister go, we saw a Prime Minister arrive, we saw a long time for Article 50 to be triggered, we saw court cases fought all the way to the Supreme Court, a lot of obstructionism, but Article 50 in the end was signed. The formal negotiations began with David Davis and Michel Barnier from the European Union this Monday. And whichever way you cut it, the result on June the 23rd last year was a massive, huge, historic result. You may love it, you may hate it. I think it did lead on to Trump triumphing in America. But 1 year on, as Theresa May arrives here this afternoon, a slightly weakened, somewhat diminished, I would say, Prime Minister, certainly in the eyes of the other European leaders. There are some here who are thinking, surely you Brits must recognise you've made the most ghastly mistake, including Donald Tusk, who, of course, is the President of the European Council. And Donald Tusk is saying, look, you know, you haven't got to leave. Come on, darlings, you can stay if you want to. Now, I think Donald Tusk is, frankly, in la-la land. I think he's in denial. I think, and mind you, do you know something? If you were one of the tens of thousands of people who worked here in Brussels, you're probably getting paid more than you ever would at any point in your life anywhere else. You've got a great lifestyle, a good pension. What's not to like? They want to keep the whole thing going. But I'm asking you, the voters, you know, a year on, how do you feel? A year on, do you feel that now perhaps you'd have voted differently? Would you, perhaps, I don't know, were you a Remainer who now thinks all those threats I was given were nonsense and I would now vote to leave? If you are, then call me on 0345 6060 973. Maybe you voted Brexit, but you're beginning to have second thoughts about how long it might take and the chaos it might cause, in which case text me on 84850, or perhaps your resolve is even stronger than ever. I tell you what, mine is, I'd definitely be voting to leave if we had a rerun tomorrow. And if that's how you feel, well, of course, you can tweet me on @LBC, not forgetting the hashtag Farage and LBC, and you can watch the show live by going to LBC's Facebook page now. And I'm going to go to John in Mansfield. John, how did you vote last year in the referendum?
I voted out, Nigel.
Did you? And how do you feel, John, a year on?
Well, I feel that I still want to come out, even more so. I think a year's been wasted. But I think the biggest stumbling block is that Ireland, Scotland and Wales, who were supposed to be part of the United Kingdom, they're only united on one thing, and that is bleeding the English taxpayer dry. And it's time that we give them all their independence, and I'd like you to rename the UKIP party the England Independence Party, and let's get going. Because England is subsidising everybody in Europe, everybody, rest of them in the UK, and also half the countries around the world as well. We're even subsidising North Korea.
When that North Korea stuff came out and the Prime Minister didn't know, I must say that was a bit of a shock. John, that's an argument about the foreign aid budget. I mean, obviously you're right. There are capital transfers that take place within the United Kingdom, a lot of them from London and the south to the north and to other parts of the country. But, you know, we are all part of one country. And do bear in mind, John, when you're talking about Brexit and the United Kingdom, don't forget that Wales the vote to leave in Wales was pretty much exactly the same as it was in England. So, you know, the Welsh voted to leave, the Scots voted to remain, as did the Northern Irish. But we are, John, still a united kingdom, are we not?
Well, I hope so. I would like to hope so, but it doesn't look like it. Because, and another thing I would like to ask, that the so-called Remainers, who are generally business people, if their books hadn't been signed off for 20 years, would they still be in business? And why does anybody with the slightest modicum of intelligence want to be members of a club whose books haven't been signed off for 20 years? You just cannot believe it. Anybody else
John,
would be closed down.
John, or they'd be in prison or whatever. No, John, I get that. You know, when you say business is for Remain, generally it's big business that's for Remain. It's multinational business that's for Remain. And I'm speaking to you now, John, and literally 100 yards from me is a building called the Berlaymont. It is the home of the European Commission. That is the place within the European Union. That institution has the sole right to propose legislation. And what you've seen are the very big businesses with their full-time professional lobbies here in Brussels. They're able in many ways to set their own rules for their own industry and to make it very, very tough for small and medium-sized competitors to compete. So generally what you see are big businesses, corporates who are for Remain, and a lot more of the smaller businesses or the self-made businessmen who tend to be for Leave. But John, you know, you've got your worries, but basically a vote again tomorrow and you're back out there voting Leave, yeah?
Definitely, most certainly.
Most certainly. John in Mansfield, thank you. He couldn't have been clearer. Ben in Wellingborough, how did you vote last year? Sorry, Ben?
I voted to leave last year.
Yes, OK. And how do you feel a year on? Do you have any reservations about that? Are you happy with what you did?
Yes, you know, I do have a few reservations on it, but I come from quite a strong Brexit area, but I think some of the facts that have come out since that, I've heard that Germany are able to actually set some rules on who they have in their nation and who they don't. Yet we don't seem to be able to. We don't seem to enforce those, and I'm a bit confused as to why.
Well, Germany have different rules on social security entitlements to us, that's true. But the idea that Germany is limiting who's coming to it, when a million came into Germany in 1 year after Angela Merkel said we can cope, and now what Germany is trying to do is to get all the other countries in the EU to share the burden as they see it, and they're pretty much getting two fingers from any of the Eastern European countries. No, but I don't really buy that. I mean, was it the immigration argument, Ben, that was the biggest driver of you saying vote Leave?
I think it was. I really do think it was, and. You know, I think that if Germany can set those social security rules, then why can't we do the same?
Because they have a contributory system and we don't. And yes, social security has some impact on the numbers that come, but it isn't the only driver. So would you feel then, Ben, if our membership of the European Union gave us a degree of control over our borders, that you'd be less inclined to support the Leave side?
Yeah, I think that's a fair statement.
Yeah. OK, well, Ben, I tell you what, in about 10 minutes' time, I'm going to give you the up-to-date statistics for immigration and population growth in the United Kingdom. And I think once you've heard those numbers, you'll think we need to do everything we can, not just with the European Union, but with the world, I think, to get a grip on this. Ben, thank you. Ben, who voted very much for border controls, sees that Germany may have some limited control over its borders and wonders why we can't have the same. Remember, all of you, that when David Cameron first came to Brussels to get a renegotiation before this referendum, one of his key demands was that we should have an emergency brake, and that was rejected. And believe me, I don't see in these negotiations that Mrs May's going to have, there's any chance of them conceding on that if we want complete tariff-free access to the single market. Hope I'm wrong. I somehow doubt it. Alex in High Wycombe, how did you vote last year and how are you feeling?
Well, I voted Remain, and I feel reinforced in my decision now. I've got a question for you, Nigel, and that is, what's actually your problem with freedom of movement? And the reason I make that is that I don't think a lot of people in this country actually know how the system works. When I went to work in Holland many years ago, they made it very clear to me that if I didn't get a job, and I think it was 6 months, it was back to the UK, and that was when we had freedom of movement then. The other thing is about criminal offences. There's a lot of the press in this country give the impression that we're completely helpless if there's criminal offences committed. That's not the case. I'm not saying you get chucked out if it's just a parking fine or something, but we have got powers to chuck out EU under existing rules if only we actually knew how they worked. And you know, as for your point about Germany having all the relaxed rules coming in, we are not part of Schengen, so the Schengen people cannot get stopped at Dover.
We can stop people and say, good morning, can we see your passport, please? Oh, yes, please do come. So what is my problem, Alex, with free movement? Let me tell you that the first 20 years of our membership of the European community, free movement was a non-issue. Why? Because we were countries of similar wealth, similar education, similar healthcare systems. It was 2004 when we opened up to first 8 and then 10 former communist countries, and I predicted it in 2004. I said it would lead to an unprecedented flow of people, and so it has, with a driving down of wages and everything else. So, Alex, free movement between equivalents, not so much of a problem. Free movement with countries where, in some cases, the minimum wage was about an eighth or a ninth of what it was in the UK. Alex, that was the problem. That was my problem. And I think many other people agree.
But the Brits going in the opposite direction, aren't they? So it actually,
okay.
In your world,
Alex,
Brits live in Britain, the Italians
there's a million.
Italy, the French live...
When I was first elected to the European Parliament, it wasn't even in my manifesto. I didn't even mention immigration or free movement. It's when you get poorer countries involved that it becomes an issue. And Tony Blair and others miscalculated on this in a huge, huge way. And Alex, whatever you think, it was a very big reason why people did vote out on June 23rd last year. Thank you very much for your call and your point. It's 7:15. You're listening to The Nigel Farage Show. Tomorrow is June the 23rd. It'll be exactly a year on from that great, in my opinion at least, historic vote where we said, you know what, we want to be friends with Europe but govern ourselves. 1 year on, I have no regrets, no remorse whatsoever. But I'm asking how you feel. Richard says to me on text, he says, I'm on holiday in the US. I'll be celebrating our British Independence Day tomorrow just as much as on the 4th of July, Nigel. Sula says, I am not for turning. I voted out. I still want out. In my diary I wrote, Independence Day, 23rd of June, 2017. Tomorrow is that day, thanks to you. Well, that's very sweet of you, Sula. And I get one here. You're so obsessed with immigration. I'm Spanish. I'm still working, having started at 9:30. I pay lots of tax. I don't offend anybody. I've been living here since 2001, and I've not met anyone complaining about immigration. No, you may not. But I bet you've met lots of people complaining about housing, complaining about healthcare provision, complaining about perhaps their travelling conditions to work, be it on the London Underground or the roads. And I'm going to talk a lot more about this in a few minutes' time. But right for now, I'm sticking to, you had your vote a year ago. Would you now change it? Would you now think, I voted out, I'm not so sure, I voted in, I don't see any threat? Manish in Harrow, you're on LBC. Would you change your vote from a year ago?
Hi, Nigel. Nice to speak to you, Nigel. Glad to speak to you. No, I'm not for changing my vote. I voted out a year ago, and the only concern, the reason why I voted out was purely because of the net migration figures and the effect it would have on our infrastructure. I think the figures were about 350,000. I
think 336 was the biggest. Yeah.
Yeah, and within 3 years, that's 1 million people, you know, and I just thought, something has to happen. However, over the last year...
Although Manish, be fair, about half of that was non-EU, but anyway, go on.
Yeah, my only concern is that with regard to the employment situation and the need of companies for talented workers, you probably heard the figure about the nurse applications have dropped to 90% to what it was.
Yeah.
How will we fill the roles of all these jobs that are required with, in a short space of time?
Well, Manish, do you know what? I was listening this morning to the fruit farming industry saying that without Romanians and Bulgarians, the strawberries would all rot in the fields. Do you know what, Manish? Before 2007 and before we had an open door to Romania and Bulgaria, we had a successful soft fruit industry going on for absolutely years. And I do think in many cases, big employers are using this as an excuse. I did see the number of nurses that had applied had dropped. Manish, do you know what I'm concerned about? I'm concerned we're not training enough of our own nurses. I'm concerned we're not training enough of our own doctors. Surely there's no reason why we can't do things like that.
Are you confident that over a 5-year period after we've exited, the economy of this country will remain buoyant?
Yes, I am, and I would say this to you. If we genuinely have shortages of labour, okay, what we can do is to issue time-dependent work permits, something that almost every normal country in the world does. It's only here in the European Union where our passports at the top say European Union, and we have the untrammelled free right to travel around and work and live around the rest of Europe. So yes, but you know what? I will say one last thing to you. I too often think that we're judging the quality of our life on GDP figures, gross domestic product figures. Oh, the economy's growing, therefore it's great that lots of people net are coming to the UK every year. And I think there are some other markers than simply GDP about our country, such as our communities, their cohesion, whether they feel at peace with themselves, whether they feel optimistic that their children are going to have at least the opportunity to enjoy the same life that they did. So I don't think just pure numbers that are given to us by economists or big businesses, Manish, that surely isn't the be-all and end-all in life, is it?
No, you're absolutely. I mean, I totally agree with that. I just feel this country has got so many good values, and I originally was from Kenya, and I've been here for over 40 years, and it's given me so many opportunities, and the goodwill this country has across the world, which I've seen, I just don't want that to be, reduced in any way. And I just think, if we can just sort of balance things up in a way which keeps everything
Manish,
nicely,
Manish, we might make some people in southern and eastern Europe a little bit unhappy because they won't be able to walk straight in. They might find it much tougher, particularly if they haven't got trades and skills to bring. But what we can do is we can open ourselves up to countries around the world in the Commonwealth, such as the country that you came from. So I think overall, if we have a fair immigration system and a fair work permit system that no longer discriminates against people because they come from Kenya in favour of those that come from Romania, I think, all in all, that'll be a better and a fairer system. And I promise you, if we have genuine shortages, we will issue time-dependent work permits. Manish, thank you very much indeed for your charming call. Ben in Chingford, how did you vote this time last year?
Hi, Nigel. So I did vote Remain. That was my decision. I was actually contemplating on voting out, and I'll tell you the reason why. It was actually mainly the £350 million a week that was going to go back into the NHS, which you so brilliantly decided to plaster all over the side of a double-decker bus.
I know. No. I tell you what, Ben. Let's start again, shall we? Let's start again, shall we? No, we've been. Ben, you've got to listen for a second. You're obviously not a regular listener to the show, because we've done this time and time and time again. I never once mentioned the figure of 350 million a week for the NHS, and I did say publicly on Question Time during the campaign that I thought the figure was a mistake. A much lower figure should have been used, and I urged and I begged Michael Gove and others in private to drop the figure because it was too high. All right, so don't put that on me. All right.
So just answer the question then, Nigel. So how many millions of votes do you think you'd lose now that people know that that figure's incorrect?
Well, had we given them the figure, Ben, let's say the figure of 220 million a week had been used, right? That figure would have stunned everybody anyway. So, actually, 350 million a week wouldn't get one vote more than 220 million a week. And I just wish they'd used a net figure and not a gross figure. But, I mean, if it's a competition about lies, I mean, do bear in mind that, 40 years ago, the establishment told people in the referendum they were voting to stay part of a common market that was about trade and would not affect their political sovereignty. So you could argue, could you not, that the other side have been conning us for nearly half a century.
No, I think the argument is, Nigel, is that your side conned us when it was most important. Your side put across the fact that they were going to deliver £350 million a week to the NHS, which they have failed to do. You've got absolutely no intention of doing so whatsoever, and it's absolutely despicable. I watched your interview on Good Morning TV the next day with Susanna Reid, and it was embarrassing. It was utterly embarrassing. It was a disgrace. You lied to the British public. You led
about what? About what?
About the figure. They specifically sat down and said to you, "Are you going to send this money to the NHS, this £350 million a week?" And you stuttered and you mumbled and you cut her off, and as you always do, whenever you
Ben, you've got a real problem here, mate. You may well have this conversation with Boris if you want to. I never once put the figure 350 million a week. I never once defended it. I thought it was a mistake. They should have used the net figure of 220. And I promise you, had it been 220 million a week on those posters or 350, it wouldn't have made any difference at all. Do you get that point or not?
Yeah, certainly. Yeah, of course I do. So the figure was incorrect. Granted,
yes.
you've admitted that. So commit to me now that £220 million a week will be delivered to the NHS now that we've decided to leave the European Union.
Well, I tell you what, you better ask Boris, who is now the Foreign Secretary, and you better ask Michael Gove, who is now in charge of Environment and DEFRA, because they are the Cabinet Ministers who made those promises about big NHS spending increases. They can answer that. I'm afraid I can't possibly answer that because I'm not in a position to deliver it. But what I can say is that we are in a far better position to spend our own money in our own country. You're listening to Nigel Farage. A year ago tomorrow, we voted to leave the European Union, a day that I thought was so exciting it should hereafter be called Independence Day, or at least after 29, when hopefully we've left. But it's pretty clear from the calls that some of you on the Remain side are really, really angry about the vote, unreconciled to the vote, pretty furious with me and others in the campaign. The evidence, of course, the polling evidence, is that there's a third group of people who did vote Remain last year and are now saying, do you know what? It was a democratic decision. Let's just get on with it. So the last polling I saw on this was from YouGov 2 weeks ago, saying that 70% now of the population simply want us to get on with it. And maybe I'll hear from a few of you in the next half an hour. But before that, I want you all, please, to have a think about this point. The Office of National Statistics this morning put out the population growth figures for last year. The UK population last year grew by 538,000 people. Add to that secret Home Office estimates that came out into the public domain just last week that perhaps up to 250,000 people every year are staying or illegally entering the United Kingdom. And you see, our population, frankly, is exploding. And yet, I listen to our leading political figures telling us we've got a shortage of housing, telling us there aren't enough resources for the National Health Service, telling us our infrastructure is crumbling and can't cope. Well, now you know why. Because if you have governments that cannot have any idea what the population is going to be in a few years' time because of open-door immigration. And by the way, that is contributing about 3/4 of this rise over the course of the last 10 to 15 years. If you've no idea how many are coming in because you haven't got control, how simply can you plan? And you know, I tried ever so hard in 2015 in the leaders' debates with the leaders of the other political parties to make the point that we have to build a new house, a new dwelling every 4 minutes just to cope with current levels of migration. And would any of them admit there was a link between the numbers of people coming and the housing crisis? And they all said, no, we must build more houses. Well, how many more houses? We need to get a grip on this. It is a major, major problem for our country. All of this is unsustainable financially, and ultimately I think it will be politically too. But back to the point, we're a year on from Brexit. How are you feeling about your vote, and would you change it? Anna in Stevenage.
Hi, how are you?
Good evening. I'm okay, thank you. So how did you vote last year, Anna?
So last year I voted to remain, and
Yes.
I would still vote to remain, as possibly you can sense from my accent. I'm from Eastern European countries.
Yeah.
I came to UK 14 years ago.
Yeah.
It was always my dream as a little girl to come to UK and to get to know the culture. I came here with my husband, and we fell in love with this country, with people,
Yep.
with the fact that you guys are so open and so nice and so, accepting other nationalities. And we decided that we want to make this place, our home. So we worked really hard, and we are still working extremely hard. We pay our taxes.
So presumably, Anna, you now have a British passport, do you?
I do have British passport.
Yeah, fine.
And I feel extremely proud of that. But,
Yeah, but would you accept, Anna? Would you accept, Anna? And yeah, you fulfilled your dream, and you're very happy, and that's great. But would you accept that the United Kingdom can't accept everybody?
Well, not really. I mean, United Kingdom is a very powerful country, and if we came here and we couldn't find a job and we couldn't find a place to live, obviously we would leave this place. So we didn't steal any work from anyone. The work was there, and we were able to get the work. We were able to, find a place to live. So it's not like we are here invading your country and stealing the jobs.
Well, no one suggested you've invaded the country for a moment, because you were allowed to come. You were allowed to come legally under free movement rules. But Anna, if our population is going up by 700,000 every year, we have a slight problem, don't we?
Well, we are all paying taxes, isn't it? So, if anything, we are contributing to the wealth of this country.
Well,
if I'm honest, when you say, all the Poles millions of Poles came here, well, I feel a little bit, not a little bit, but very saddened, because, all my heart is here. All my life is here now, and I want to stay here. But when I hear you telling that publicly, it's really heartbreaking.
Well, what I said, Anna, was 1 million Poles have come here and 40,000 Brits have gone there. That does suggest to me there's a slight imbalance in this relationship.
Well, obviously, as the numbers say, but at the same time, we are contributing to the economy of the UK, isn't it?
Well, it depends on what people are earning. All I can say is very large numbers of unskilled labour overall net is not benefiting the British economy. And even if you take into account taxes and expenditure, what none of it takes into account are capital costs, which new roads and new hospitals are. Anna, look, we've always been an open country, but we've never been a stupid country. And I think to open the doors unconditionally in 2004 to 8 and then 10 members was irresponsible. And I hope we're going to get a grip on it. But you know what, Anna? maybe we won't. I thank you for your call. Tom says by text, yes, Nigel, shout over a coherent caller who is making good points because your lies are coming out. This $350 million a week thing really does get me down. I never mentioned it. Steve says, I changed my vote to double Remain. Remain isn't strong enough. Well, Steve, you'll be very pleased to hear that the one big announcement that has so far come out of the European summit is that Donald Tusk has announced in the last half an hour a big, dramatic forward move for the European Union towards having a full, coherent European army. So there you are. You know, when I tried this with Nick Clegg on an LBC debate in 2014, I was told it was a dangerous fantasy. Who've been the liars in this debate? You know, if you're remaining in the European Union, and if you still want to remain, that's fine, but you're staying part of something that is becoming militaristic and is increasingly passing more and more powers to the centre and away from nation-state democracies. That is undeniable. Linda says, no way I would change my vote. I still believe Brexit is the best way forward, but we have to knuckle down and work hard to keep our independence. Well, I guess, in a way, all countries have to do that. Samuel, in Golders Green, have you changed your mind from this time last year?
No, I haven't. Firstly, Nigel, I want to say it's an absolute pleasure to talk to you. I've been a big fan for a long time. No, I don't think we should have another vote or to, you know, I do not regret the decision based on the fact that the way that the European leaders have been treating us, they treated David Cameron when he went to renegotiate everything with Europe. You know, the way they've treated us and the way they've treated him is absolutely disgusting. And, you know, that's cemented my idea that we're better off out.
There is a certain sort of bully boy element, I have to say, about this European Union. And we've seen it not directed just towards us, but look at the Greeks. You know, the Greeks, who've seen their economy contract by 28% since the euro crisis hit, voted for a government that wanted to ease back on some of the extreme measures being forced upon them, and they were beaten into submission. And Varoufakis, who was their rather trendy finance minister, said it was just like dealing with thugs. So Samuel, there is a side to this of unelected bureaucrats wielding huge power that I must say I find pretty unattractive.
And exactly, and also, you know, the fact they're completely unelected completely, destroys the point of having an elected government in Parliament in Westminster. If they're going to be overridden every single time by some Eurocrats and some guy in a suit in Brussels who has no idea the way things run in London. And
the problem is, Samuel, they set this thing up with the European Commission having the sole right to propose legislation and the sole right to repeal legislation. And people say, Nigel, we should reform it. But you know what? You can't reform it, because when they had their big constitutional convention 15 years ago to try and rejig the whole thing, they decided their system of lawmaking was perfect. There is no demand in this town to change that system of lawmaking, to put it in the hands of Democrats. So, Samuel, I am absolutely with you. I think we made the right decision. It's a year since the referendum, a year since the Leave side won, and it's been a year of huge political turbulence, and I have to say I believe that many of our elected political class still find that result very, very difficult to get a handle on. Many of them still fundamentally disagree with it. Many of them now, I think, in the new Parliament, after the general election, want to try to water it down. But I'm wondering how you're feeling about your vote last year. Warren says to me, I would still vote to leave. My dad came here from Tunisia when he was 7, and he says it isn't sustainable. Ralph in Canterbury, how did you vote, and have you changed your mind?
Hi, Nigel. I voted to leave, and I haven't necessarily changed my mind, but what I am is rather convinced that the establishment are doing their best to undermine everyone who voted to leave, because every day on every news bulletin there's always this is how Brexit is going to affect you negatively. I have yet to see, since you left the big stage, as it were, I've yet to see someone go on the news and go, this is great news. When we leave, this is going to be good for us. It's all negative, and that's got to be wearing people down. And even I'm doubting it, and I'm a staunch leaver. But you think, crikey, today we can't get fruit pickers. I live in the Garden of England, and I'm told by the farmers locally that they can get fruit pickers. So, it's all negative.
It's very interesting, Ralph, that you make that point about the sort of spin PR campaign that's going on out there. The fruit pickers, and you're quite right, you're in the middle of the Garden of England, the fruit pickers argument, be very clear through a lot of national media today. We have to have an open door to Romania and Bulgaria. We need more people to come into the country to be fruit pickers. But, Ralph, what was really interesting is, looking at the BBC's website earlier, there was virtually no mention of the Office of National Statistic numbers showing that our population last year had grown officially by 538,000. So you're right, we don't have enough voices making the counter-arguments, and I do think that the establishment are having it too much their own way at the moment. I do absolutely agree with that. I would ask you to keep the faith, as it were, but you're just beginning to sort of feel a bit worn down by it all, yeah?
I want to hear. I'm not worn down because I'm a staunch leaver, but I can feel that people who don't have that resolve, thinking, actually, have we made the right decision? And the gradual wearing down effect, I'm actually starting to think, you know what? I don't think we're ever going to leave. I think it's going to get... If we get this for 2 more years, enough people will go, actually, there's so much negativity around it. Can we vote now again and we'll stay? I genuinely think that could well happen.
Well, Ralph, there's no doubt there are a lot of people in Westminster who would like to force us into having a second referendum on this. But equally, Ralph, what I've seen is that there's been a shift, that quite a lot of Remainers are now happy for us to leave because they're Democrats. But don't underestimate the passion of a huge percentage of those Leave voters, and they are not in the mood for being diddled. And if they are, we will see a political revolution in our country, bigger, Ralph, than the one we've seen already. All right, listen, thank you. Thank you very much for your call. Thank you. Peter in Wimbledon, how are you feeling a year on?
Year on, Nigel. I would never change my vote in my life because by doing so, I would be falling for the lies of the biggest conman in British politics, Mr. Nigel Farage. And
come on, Peter. I'm a beginner compared to Ted Heath and Peter Mandelson and Tony Blair and Nick Clegg. I mean, I'm a beginner, Peter, aren't I?
Well, you know, Nigel, because, you know, you mentioned about this bus, and the bus was £350 million. Definitely is not your baby. It's Boris Johnson's. But you stood in front of the breaking point poster with Syrian refugees, which has nothing to do with the EU.
Hang on. There was nothing untrue about it. It was a true photograph of the Merkel madness when she invited unlimited numbers to come into the European Union.
What Merkel has got to do with the United Kingdom? Just explain that to me, please.
Because once you come into the European Union, you can, in a short space of time, get a European Union passport and then happily, freely, legally come to the United Kingdom.
It's not a short space of time. There are certain criteria.
4 years in Hungary.
Before you in Germany, you talk about Merkel, in Germany. Before you get a German passport, you'll be able to travel. So, Nigel, you're scared. They worked on some people, on those who Ian Duncan Smith was asking the question another day. So, what do Remainers think? We Leavers are stupid. Well, yes, most of the Leavers are stupid because most of the Leavers were thinking we should have left on the 24th of June. You know, a lot of people calling the station saying, "Why are we still in the EU? We should have left on the 24th of June." What do you call these people? The people who have no idea how complex, how important this is with us. And the other thing is about you being a convent.
I call them. I tell you what I call them, Peter. I call them optimistic patriots. How about that?
Well, they refuse to acknowledge the facts. That since the Brexit vote, the value of the pound has dropped. The cost of raw materials and food has gone up. And people are suffering because wages stagnation, inflation is going up, and people would rather listen to your lies rather than just to listen to the facts, what's happening.
I tell you what, Peter. Peter. Let's have a little challenge here, shall we? Let's have a little challenge. Name me one lie that I told in the referendum. One.
Well, the Syrian refugee is the first one, isn't it?
No. 1.7 million people came into the European Union via the Mediterranean in that year, and actually very few of them were from Syria. That photograph you saw, very few of those were Syrian. They were coming from all over the world using the classic mistake. So can you name me one lie?
Well, this is the biggest lie you've done, and you
Which
know
one?
yourself it's a lie because it's got nothing to do with Britain. Those people were not coming to Britain, and you stood in front of their poster saying breaking point. Let me tell you another thing about you being a conman, because according to you, every politician which associates themselves with the Goldman Sachs have lost all their credibility. But when it comes to those who are working in Trump cabinet, they're okay, and they get your full approval because according to you, they're clever people. And you're selling this to British people, and those British people who believe your lies, I can't see through you.
I tell you what, Peter, Goldman Sachs people are very, very clever people. Whether they do good things or bad things, like getting Greece into the euro, they're very, very clever people. They're at the very top. They're at the very top of their game. Now, Peter, you know, I don't mind. Next time you ring, I want specific lies, all right? Because you haven't managed yet to nail me on one of them. And my last call, I think, this evening is going to be Steph in Sutton. Steph, good evening.
Hi, Nigel.
Have you changed your mind, Steph?
Yes, I have. I actually abstained. It seems like such a huge decision, and you know, you can't vote for something else in 4 years' time like you can in an election. So I abstained, but now I would vote to remain, if I could do it again.
And what are you concerned about?
Because Theresa May isn't doing anything to make sure that the skilled workers that we need know they're still going to be welcome here. I'm a nurse. We have 24,000 nursing vacancies in the UK, and we've had this massive dip in applicants, and it's actually dangerous. I don't know how our health service can survive this. We are utterly dependent on foreign workers in our health service. You can talk about growing more here, but that takes time. You know, it doesn't happen overnight. You can't just make 24,000 nurses materialise overnight in the UK from our own population. We need these people. It's really, really frightening.
Should we, I mean, if we need foreign labour, should we do it on a work permit system, or should we link it to automatically being able to come to live, work and ultimately settle full-time as well?
You know what? I really don't care, just as long as we have the people we need to keep our patients safe.
Right. So maybe your comment...
Wards are a dangerous place these days.
Maybe your comment is more a comment... Maybe your comment is more a comment about the British government than it is about the Brexit process. That do you? I mean, what you're saying is you're not getting direction from Mrs May, basically.
Don't try and fudge it and twist it and put it round on the government. This is
well, that's what you said. Well, I mean, that's what you said, isn't it?
Yes, but you can't separate Brexit from it. It's just as much about Brexit as it is about the direction from the government, isn't it? You know, if we didn't have a Brexit, we wouldn't have a direction.
Actually, to be honest with you, Steph, and thank you for your call, Brexit is what we make of it. You know, I have to say, a year on, thank goodness we voted for freedom, democracy and the ability to reach out to the rest of the world. Brexit was never going to solve any of our domestic problems. What Brexit does is give the British government the opportunity to do things differently, to make us more competitive and to make us more global in our outlook, and that includes immigration as well. Thus far, the government, I think in many, many ways, have really pretty much failed us. Because we've had indecision, we've had dithering, and I can see why some people are getting worried about the Brexit process. I'm worried about the Brexit process, but I'm not in the least bit worried about the vote we took or the principle. You've been listening to The Nigel Farage Show.